The dust hadn't settled on Hannah Brennan's knees before she heard the banker's cold refusal. And in that moment of desperation, she realized her father's dream of keeping the ranch would die with him unless a miracle walked through that door. The year was 1883, and San Angelo, Texas, had grown from a dusty outpost into a bustling cattle town where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card or the stroke of a pen. Hannah had never imagined she would be the one kneeling on the rough wooden floor of the First National Bank, her pride scattered like chaff in the wind, begging for 30 more days to save everything her father had built over 23 years of backbreaking work. "Miss Brennan, I have explained this to you twice already," Mr. Whitmore said, his voice as dry as the summer heat outside. He sat behind his massive oak desk like a king on a throne, his spectacles perched on his narrow nose. "Your father's loan came due 2 weeks ago. The bank has been more than patient, considering the circumstances of his passing. But business is business, and sentiment does not pay mortgages." Hannah's dark hair had come loose from its pins during her ride into town, and now it hung around her face in wild tangles. Her dress, once her Sunday best, was faded and mended in places. She clasped her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Please, Mr. Whitmore, the cattle drive to Fort Worth is next month. Once we sell the herd, I will have more than enough to pay what we owe plus interest. Just 30 days, that is all I am asking." "And who exactly will lead this cattle drive?" Whitmore leaned back in his chair, a thin smile playing on his lips. "You have no foreman, your ranch hands scattered after your father died. From what I hear, you have been trying to manage that ranch alone for the past 2 months, and it has been a losing battle." The words stung because they were true. Papa had died suddenly in July, thrown from a spooked horse that had never given him trouble before. The doctor said his heart had given out before he even hit the ground. At 21 years old, Hannah had found herself alone with a failing cattle ranch, mounting debts, and no one to turn to. The few hands who had stayed on after Papa's death had left when she couldn't make payroll. Now it was just her and old Miguel, the cook who had worked for her father since before she was born. "I can manage it," Hannah said, but her voice wavered. "I grew up on that ranch, I know cattle, I know the land." "You are a young woman alone," Whitmore said flatly. "The bank cannot extend credit based on hope and determination. I need collateral, I need guarantees, and I need them now. Since you cannot provide any of those things, I am afraid the bank will be foreclosing on the property. The auction is set for the day after tomorrow." The day after tomorrow. 48 hours until everything her father had worked for, everything her mother had loved before the fever took her 10 years ago, would belong to someone else. Hannah felt something break inside her chest, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. Without thinking, without pride or dignity left to lose, she slid from the chair and onto her knees on the rough pine floor. "Please," she whispered. "I am begging you, just give me one more chance. 30 days, I will find a way, I swear I will find a way." Whitmore's face remained impassive. He started shuffling papers on his desk as if she were already dismissed, already gone. "Miss Brennan, please get up. This display is unseemly and it changes nothing. The decision has been made." The door to the bank opened behind her, letting in a blast of September heat and the jingle of spurs. Hannah did not turn around. Tears were streaming down her face now, and shame burned hot in her chest. She had never begged for anything in her life, and here she was, on her knees in front of the coldest man in San Angelo, and it was not enough. Nothing she could do would ever be enough. "Mr. Whitmore," a deep voice said from behind her, "seems like you have got yourself a situation here." "Mr. Carson," Whitmore said, and there was something different in his voice now. Respect, maybe, or wariness. This does not concern you, just finishing up some unpleasant business." Hannah felt a hand on her arm, gentle but firm. "Madam," the voice said, closer now, "let me help you up." She wanted to refuse. She wanted to shake off this stranger and maintain what little dignity she had left. But she was so tired, so worn down by 2 months of fighting a battle she could not win, that she let him lift her to her feet. When she finally looked at him, she found herself staring into a pair of steel-gray eyes set in a sun-bronzed face. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, trail-worn leather chaps over denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a black hat pushed back on his head. But there was something in the way he carried himself, in the way Whitmore had greeted him, that suggested he was more than just another drifter. "Are you all right?" he asked her quietly. Hannah nodded, unable to speak. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. The cowboy turned to Whitmore and his expression hardened. "What is this unpleasant business you are finishing up?" "The Brennan Ranch," Whitmore said. "The loan has come due. Miss Brennan here cannot pay, so the bank is exercising its right to foreclose. It is a private matter, Carson." "Brennan Ranch," the cowboy repeated. He glanced at Hannah, then back at Whitmore. "That is the spread about 10 miles northwest of town, is it not? Good water, decent grazing land, old Jack Brennan's place." "Was Jack Brennan's place," Whitmore corrected. "He passed 2 months back. His daughter has been trying to run it, but as you can see, that has not worked out." Something flashed in the cowboy's eyes. Anger, maybe. "And how much does she owe?" "That is confidential bank business. How much?" The cowboy's voice did not rise, but it took on an edge that made Whitmore shift in his chair. $3,000, Whitmore finally said. "Plus 2 months of back interest. Call it $3,200 total." Hannah felt the number like a physical blow. Hearing it said out loud made it real in a way it had not been before. $3,200 might as well have been $32,000. She did not have it. She could not get it. The ranch was lost. The cowboy was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I will cover it." Hannah's head snapped up. Whitmore leaned forward in his chair. "Excuse me." "I will cover the debt," the cowboy repeated. He reached into his vest and pulled out a leather wallet. $3,200. That settles the Brennan loan in full, does it not?" "Now wait just a minute," Whitmore said. But the cowboy was already counting out bills, placing them on the desk in neat stacks. Hannah stared at the money as if it were a mirage that might disappear if she looked too hard. "Mr. Carson, you cannot be serious," Whitmore protested. "You do not even know this woman." "I knew Jack Brennan," the cowboy said. "He was a good man. Helped me out when I first came to this territory 5 years back, gave me work when I needed it. Figure I owe his daughter the same courtesy." He finished counting and pushed the money across the desk. "That should do it. Draw up a receipt saying the Brennan Ranch loan is paid in full." Whitmore looked at the money, then at Hannah, then at the cowboy. His thin face was pinched with displeasure. "Very well. But you understand, Mr. Carson, if you are paying off her debt, technically the lien transfers to you. The property would be yours until she repays you." "No," the cowboy said flatly. "The property stays in Miss Brennan's name. I am not buying the ranch. I am settling a debt to an old friend." "Draw up the papers to reflect that." "That is highly irregular." "I do not care if it is irregular. Make it happen." Whitmore's mouth pressed into a thin line, but he nodded and began pulling out forms from his desk drawer. Hannah stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. This stranger, this cowboy who claimed to have known her father, had just handed over more money than most men saw in a year. And he was doing it for her. For Papa. She did not even know his name. As if reading her thoughts, the cowboy turned to her and touched the brim of his hat. "Austin Carson, madam, pleased to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "Hannah Brennan," she managed to say. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "I do not understand. Why would you do this? Like I said, I owed your father a debt. This seems like a fair way to settle it. But $3,200 is just money," Austin said. "I have been saving for a while, had plans to buy my own spread eventually, but those plans can wait. Your father gave me a chance when nobody else would. I was just a kid fresh off a failed homestead in Kansas, did not know cattle from chickens. Jack took me on, taught me the work, treated me fair. Not many men would have done that." He paused, and something softened in his expression. "When I heard he had passed, I meant to come by and pay my respects. I should have come sooner, if I had known you were dealing with this alone." He trailed off, but Hannah understood what he was not saying. If he had known, maybe he could have helped sooner. Maybe she would not have had to spend 2 months running herself ragged, trying to do the work of 5 men, watching her father's legacy crumble a little more each day. "I do not know how to thank you," she said. "No thanks necessary." Austin glanced at Whitmore, who was still scratching away at the paperwork with obvious reluctance. "Though I reckon you are still in a tight spot. You said something about a cattle drive." Hannah nodded. "Papa was planning to drive 300 head to Fort Worth before he died. The buyers are expecting the cattle next month. If I can get them there, I will have enough money to keep the ranch running through the winter and start rebuilding in the spring. But I have no crew, no foreman. It has been just me and Miguel, our cook. Miguel Hernandez. Old-timer with a gray mustache, makes the best biscuits in 3 counties. Despite everything, Hannah felt a smile tug at her lips. That is him. Well, you have got at least one good man then. What you need is about 5 or 6 more, plus someone who knows the trail to Fort Worth." Austin was quiet for a moment, considering. "I just finished a drive up from South Texas. Was planning to take some time off, but I suppose I could postpone that. If you are willing to hire me as foreman, I can get a crew together and get those cattle to Fort Worth." Hannah stared at him. "You would do that? Lady, I just gave you $3,200. Might as well make sure you can pay me back." He grinned, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less weathered. "Besides, I am a cowboy. Sitting around town makes me restless. I would rather be on the trail." Whitmore cleared his throat loudly. "The papers are ready. If you would both sign here, we can finalize this transaction." For the next few minutes, Hannah focused on the paperwork, carefully reading each document despite her hands shaking. Austin stood beside her, patient and calm, occasionally pointing out a clause or asking Whitmore to clarify something. By the time they were done, the afternoon sun was slanting through the bank's windows, painting everything in shades of gold. When they finally stepped outside, Hannah had to squint against the brightness. The street was busy with afternoon traffic. Wagons rolling past, cowboys on horseback, women with parasols picking their way along the wooden sidewalks. San Angelo had come alive in the hour she had been inside the bank, and it felt surreal that the world had kept turning while hers had almost ended and then been saved by a stranger. "I tied my horse up at the hitching post down the street," Hannah said. "I should get back to the ranch. Miguel will be worried. I left before dawn and he did not know where I was going." "I will ride out with you," Austin said. "Want to take a look at the herd, see what we are working with. If that is all right with you, of course." "Yes, I mean, you just saved my ranch. The least I can do is show you around." She was babbling now, her composure crumbling as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. She had been so close to losing everything, and now she had a chance. A real chance. They walked to where her horse, a sturdy bay mare named Copper, was waiting. Austin's mount was a tall gray gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. As they rode out of town, Hannah found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. He sat his horse like he had been born in the saddle, relaxed but alert, eyes constantly scanning the horizon. She tried to remember if her father had ever mentioned an Austin Carson, but the name did not ring any bells. Of course, Papa had employed dozens of men over the years. She could not remember them all. "You said you worked for my father 5 years ago," she asked. "That is right. Autumn of '78. I was 17, green as grass and about as useful. My family's homestead in Kansas had failed after 2 years of bad crops and my father drinking away what little money we had. I left home and drifted south, figured Texas would be warmer at least." He smiled at the memory. "I showed up at your father's ranch with nothing but the clothes on my back and a half-starved horse. He could have turned me away, but he did not. He gave me meals, a place in the bunkhouse, and work. Real work, not charity. By the time I moved on the next spring, he had taught me everything I know about cattle." "Where did you go after you left?" "Worked on a few different ranches. Learned from different foremen, different ways of doing things. Did some bronco busting, some trail driving. Spent a winter working at a sawmill in East Texas, which taught me I never want to work in a sawmill again." He chuckled. "This past spring, I joined up with a big outfit driving cattle from the Rio Grande Valley to Dodge City. Made good money on that drive, and I have been careful with it. That is where the 3,200 came from. 5 years of wages, saved up bit by bit. And you just gave it all to me." Hannah shook her head. "I still cannot believe it. Believe it. And you will pay me back once you sell those cattle. We can work out the terms later. Something fair for both of us. No interest, no pressure. Just a handshake deal between you and me." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. The land around San Angelo was a mix of rolling hills and flat plains, covered in brown grass this time of year, dotted with mesquite and live oak. In the distance, the Concho River snaked through the landscape, a lifeline of water in this dry country. Hannah had always loved this land, even in the harsh summer months when the heat seemed to press down on everything like a physical weight. This was home. This was what her father had loved, what her mother had loved. And now, thanks to Austin Carson, she still had a chance to keep it. "There," she said, pointing ahead. "That is our boundary line." The Brennan Ranch sprawled across nearly 2,000 acres of decent grazing land. It was not the biggest spread in the county, but it was well watered and the grass came back strong after the winter rains. As they rode up the long dirt road to the main house, Hannah saw it through a stranger's eyes. The faded paint on the clapboard house, the sagging porch that Papa had meant to fix last spring, the barn that needed new shingles, the corrals that could use fresh timber. Everything showed the neglect of the past 2 months, the slow decay that happened when there were not enough hands to keep up with the work. But there were also signs of her desperate attempts to hold things together. A newly patched section of fence, a pile of firewood she had spent 3 days chopping and stacking, a vegetable garden that she had been trying to keep watered despite the demands of everything else. Austin took it all in without comment. When they reached the barn, he dismounted and tied his horse, then came around to help Hannah down from Copper. She did not really need the help, but she appreciated the gesture. Her legs were shaky from the emotional turmoil of the day. "Hannah." Miguel came hurrying out of the ranch house, moving surprisingly fast for a man in his 60s. "Dios mío, I was worried sick. You left before breakfast and you did not say where you were going. I thought maybe something had happened to you." "I am sorry, Miguel. I should have left a note. I had to go into town to see the banker." She saw the worry in his eyes and quickly added, "It is all right. Everything is all right now. Miguel looked from her to Austin, his weathered face skeptical. Is that so? Miguel, this is Austin Carson. He worked for Papa a few years back. He has agreed to help us. She took a deep breath. He paid off the bank loan. The ranch is safe. The old cook's eyes widened. Paid off the loan, all of it, Austin confirmed. And I am going to help Miss Brennan get her cattle to Fort Worth. We will need to hire a crew and organize the drive, get everything ready to move out in the next week or two. Miguel looked at Austin for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You look familiar. You were the skinny kid with the Kansas accent, yes. The one who could not rope a fence post if his life depended on it, Austin laughed. That was me, though I have gotten better at roping since then. You would have to still be alive. But Miguel was smiling now, and he extended his hand. It is good to see you again, Austin. And good that you have come back. Hannah needs help, though she is too stubborn to ask for it. I am not stubborn, Hannah protested. You are exactly as stubborn as your father, Miguel said affectionately. It is why you have lasted this long on your own, but stubborn only gets you so far. Sometimes you need help. He clapped Austin on the shoulder. Come inside. I will make coffee and you can tell us your plans for this cattle drive. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the ranch house kitchen, the three of them huddled around the scarred wooden table that had been in Hannah's family for as long as she could remember. Austin laid out his plan. They would need at least 6 good men, plus a wrangler for the horse remuda. He knew some reliable cowboys who might be available for hire. They would need to gather the herd from the far pastures, brand any calves that had been missed, and get everything ready for the long drive to Fort Worth. The trail would take about 3 weeks if the weather held and they did not run into trouble. What kind of trouble? Hannah asked. Rivers running high from rain, rustlers, stampedes, sickness in the herd, could be anything or nothing. That is the nature of a cattle drive. Austin leaned back in his chair. But I have done this before and I am good at it. I will get your cattle to Fort Worth, Miss Brennan. You have my word on that. Please, Hannah said. After everything you have done, call me Hannah. Hannah, then. He smiled at her, and she felt something flutter in her chest. It was just gratitude, she told herself. Relief that she was not alone anymore. But when their eyes met across the table, she felt the flutter again, and she looked away quickly. Over the next week, Austin proved to be as good as his word. He rode into San Angelo and came back with 6 cowboys he vouched for personally. There was Charlie, a grizzled veteran in his 40s who had been up the trail a dozen times. Young Tommy, barely 18, who was eager to prove himself. The Martinez brothers, Juan and Carlos, who worked as a team and had reputations for being steady in a crisis. A quiet black cowboy named Samuel who, Austin said, was the best horse handler in Texas. And finally, Ezra, a former Union soldier who had come west after the war and never looked back. Hannah had worried about how the men would react to working for a female ranch owner, but Austin had handled that smoothly. He made it clear from the start that he was foreman and he answered to Hannah, and any man who had a problem with that could ride out immediately. None of them did. They were professional cattlemen who needed work, and the Brennan Ranch was offering fair wages and a chance to make the trip to Fort Worth, where there would be more opportunities after the cattle were sold. The ranch suddenly came alive again. The bunkhouse that had sat empty for 2 months was full of voices and the smell of tobacco smoke in the evenings. The corrals echoed with the sound of horses and cattle. Miguel was in his element, cooking for a crew again, grumbling good-naturedly about how much food cowboys could pack away. And Hannah found herself swept up in the controlled chaos of preparing for a major cattle drive. Austin was everywhere, it seemed. Up before dawn to check the herd, spending long days in the saddle gathering cattle from the far pastures, working late into the night repairing tack and equipment. But no matter how busy he was, he always had time to explain things to Hannah, to make sure she understood what was happening and why. "You are the owner," he told her one evening as they stood by the corral, watching Samuel work with a skittish young horse. "These are your cattle, your ranch, your decisions. I am just the hired help. You need to understand the business if you are going to keep this place running." "You are not just hired help," Hannah said. "You are the man who saved my ranch." Austin shook his head. "I gave you a loan." "You are saving the ranch yourself. You just needed a little help to get started." He glanced at her, and in the fading light his eyes were soft. "Your father would be proud of you, Hannah. What you have done these past 2 months, trying to keep this place going alone, that took real courage." Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes. She had not cried since that awful day in the bank, had not let herself break down because there was too much work to do. But Austin's words touched something deep inside her. "I miss him," she whispered. "Every day I miss him so much." "I know," Austin said gently. "Losing a parent is hard. I lost my mother when I was 12. Never really got over it, just learned to carry the grief a little easier as time went on." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Then Austin said, "You should come on the drive." Hannah looked at him in surprise. "What? Come with us to Fort Worth. It is your herd. You should be there when we sell them. Besides, you know this land and these cattle better than any of us. You grew up here. That knowledge is valuable." "I have never been on a real cattle drive," Hannah admitted. "Papa always left me here to manage the ranch when he went up the trail." "Well, Miguel can manage things here for a few weeks, and I will be there to help you. What do you say? Want to see Fort Worth?" Hannah thought about it. The idea of leaving the ranch, even for a few weeks, felt strange. But Austin was right. This was her herd, her livelihood. She should be there to see it through to the end. And if she was being honest with herself, the prospect of spending 3 weeks on the trail with Austin was not unappealing. "All right," she said. "I will come." Austin's face broke into a wide grin. "Good. We leave in 3 days." Those 3 days passed in a blur of final preparations. Hannah packed her saddlebags with practical clothes, trying not to think too hard about what she was doing. Miguel fussed over her like a mother hen, making sure she had enough food, enough warm clothes for the cool nights, enough common sense not to get herself killed. The cowboys treated her with a mix of respect and curiosity, clearly unsure what to make of a female ranch owner who planned to go up the trail with them. The morning they left dawned clear and cool, with just a hint of autumn in the air. 300 head of cattle milled in the holding pen, bawling and restless. The remuda of 20 horses waited in a separate corral, saddled and ready. Hannah sat on Copper, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. Austin rode up beside her on his gray gelding. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she said, and tried to sound more confident than she felt. "Let them loose." Austin called, and Charlie swung open the gate. The cattle poured out in a river of brown and white, their hooves raising a cloud of dust that caught the morning light. The cowboys fell into practice positions around the herd, whooping and whistling, guiding the cattle north toward the distant promise of Fort Worth. Hannah touched her heels to Copper's sides and joined the flow, and suddenly she was part of something larger than herself, larger than her grief and fear. She was part of the great tradition of the Texas cattle drive, following the same trails her father had followed, doing the work he had loved. The first few days were an adjustment. Hannah's body ached from long hours in the saddle. The dust got into everything, her clothes, her hair, her food. The cattle were unpredictable. sometimes moving smoothly and sometimes balking at shadows or sudden noises. But slowly, she found her rhythm. She learned to read the herd, to sense when they were getting restless, to know when to push them harder and when to let them graze and rest. Austin was always nearby, watching out for her without being obvious about it. He taught her the cowboy skills her father had never gotten around to showing her: how to cut a single cow out of the herd, how to read the weather signs in the clouds, how to find good grazing and water even in unfamiliar country. In the evenings, when they made camp and the herd settled down for the night, he would sit beside her by the fire and tell her stories about his years on the trail, about the places he had been and the things he had seen. Hannah found herself looking forward to those evening conversations. Austin had a way of making her laugh even after a long, exhausting day. He listened when she talked about her father, about growing up on the ranch, about her dreams for the future. And slowly, without quite realizing when it happened, she stopped seeing him as just the cowboy who had saved her ranch. She started seeing him as Austin, a man who was kind and strong and funny, who treated her as an equal, who looked at her sometimes with an expression that made her breath catch. It happened one night about a week into the drive. They had made camp by a small creek, and after supper, Hannah had walked downstream a bit to wash the dust from her face and hands. When she came back, Austin was waiting for her at the edge of the firelight. "Wanted to make sure you did not wander too far," he said. "Country like this, easy to lose your bearings in the dark." "I grew up in Texas," Hannah said, but she was smiling. "I know how to find my way back to camp." "I know you do, but humor me." He fell into step beside her as they walked back toward the fire. The rest of the crew was already settling in for the night, bedrolls spread out under the stars. Charlie and Ezra would take the first watch on the herd. "Austin," Hannah said, and then hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything? Why did you really pay off my debt? I know you said you owed my father, but that seems like more than any debt would require." Austin was quiet for a long moment. They had reached her bedroll, spread out a little distance from the others for the sake of propriety. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking up at the stars. "Your father saved my life," he finally said. "Not just gave me a job, actually saved my life. I did not tell you the whole story before." He glanced at her. "When I showed up at your ranch that autumn, I was not just broke and hungry. I was running from something. There was a man back in Kansas, a gambler who claimed I owed him money. I did not, but he was not the type to care about the truth. He had sent men after me, and they were getting close. I was about ready to give up, maybe let them catch me, when I stumbled onto your father's land." Hannah listened, hardly breathing. "Jack found me collapsed by one of his stock tanks. I had not eaten in 3 days, and I was half out of my mind with fever. He got me back to the ranch, had Miguel nurse me back to health. When those men came looking for me a week later, your father sent them packing, told them I was under his protection and they could deal with him if they had a problem with that." Austin shook his head at the memory. "They left. And I stayed on through the winter, got strong again, learned to be a cowboy. By spring, the whole business had blown over. That gambler had moved on to other victims. I was free." "I never knew," Hannah whispered. "Your father was not one to talk about good deeds. He just did what he thought was right and expected other folks to do the same." Austin looked at her directly now. "So when I heard he had died and left a daughter in trouble, paying off a bank loan seemed like the least I could do. I owe him everything, Hannah. Everything I am, everything I have done since that winter. He gave me a second chance at life." On impulse, Hannah reached out and took his hand. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me that, for everything." Austin's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. They stood like that for a moment, hands clasped, the night wind soft around them. Then Austin said very quietly, "Hannah, I need to tell you something else." "What?" "I did not just come back to pay a debt. I mean I did, but that is not the only reason." He took a breath. "I never forgot your father, and I never forgot the Brennan Ranch. Over the years, whenever I was in San Angelo, I would ask after your family. I heard about your mother passing, and I was sorry for it. And I heard about you, the daughter who helped run the ranch, who could ride and rope as well as any man, who was smart and brave and beautiful." Hannah's heart was pounding now. "Austin, I know I should not be saying this," he continued. "You are my employer. I am working for you. But out here, under these stars, I cannot seem to keep quiet anymore. Hannah, from the moment I saw you in that bank, from the moment I helped you stand up, I felt something. And every day since then, every day we have spent together, that feeling has only gotten stronger." "What feeling?" Hannah whispered, though she thought she knew. "I am falling in love with you," Austin said simply. "Maybe I already have fallen, I do not know. All I know is that when I think about the future, you are in it. And I know that is crazy, we have only known each other 2 weeks, but sometimes you just know." "You know?" Hannah could not speak. Her throat was tight with emotion. She realized she was crying, tears spilling down her cheeks, but they were not sad tears. They were the opposite of sad. "Say something," Austin said, and for the first time since she had met him, he sounded uncertain. "Tell me I am a fool. Tell me to shut up and mind my own business. Tell me something." Instead of speaking, Hannah stepped forward and kissed him. It was her first real kiss, and it was clumsy and imperfect and absolutely perfect all at once. Austin made a surprised sound, then his arms came around her, pulling her close. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, and Hannah felt like she had finally come home to a place she had not even known she was looking for. When they finally pulled apart, Austin was grinning. "I will take that as a good sign." "You are not a fool," Hannah said. "Or if you are, then I am too, because I feel the same way. I did not want to admit it, did not think I should, but Austin, I think I am falling in love with you too." They spent another few minutes together, talking quietly, stealing kisses, making promises. Finally, Austin reluctantly said he needed to go relieve Charlie on watch. Hannah crawled into her bedroll with a smile on her face that would not fade. She fell asleep thinking about gray eyes and strong hands, and a voice that said her name like it was something precious. The rest of the drive took on a different quality after that night. Hannah and Austin were careful not to show favoritism in front of the crew, maintaining professional boundaries during the day. But in the evenings, they found ways to be together, to talk and laugh and share the small intimacies that new love requires. The other cowboys were not blind. Hannah caught knowing looks passing between Juan and Carlos, saw Tommy grinning at nothing whenever she and Austin stood close together. But no one said anything directly. They were too respectful of Austin and by extension of her. The country they passed through was beautiful and sometimes harsh. They crossed rivers swollen with late summer rains, forded creeks that ran clear over smooth stones, climbed hills that gave views of endless prairie stretching to the horizon. They saw herds of wild mustangs, their manes flying as they raced across the grassland. Once, they spotted a group of Comanche hunters in the distance, but the Indians only watched them pass and made no move to approach. The days of open warfare between whites and Indians in this part of Texas were mostly over, though tensions still ran high. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into the drive, they spotted a dust cloud on their back trail. Austin rode out with Charlie to investigate and came back looking grim. "Riders," he said. "Maybe 6 or 7 of them. Could be nothing, could be trouble." "Rustlers?" Hannah asked. "Maybe. Or just cowboys looking for work. No way to tell until they catch up to us." Austin turned to the crew. "Keep the herd moving. Samuel, you and Tommy get the remuda bunched tight. Juan, Carlos, drop back and keep an eye on our tail. Ezra, Charlie, stay with the herd. Hannah, you stick close to me." They pushed on, but the dust cloud behind them grew larger. By late afternoon, the riders had closed the distance enough that Hannah could make out individual figures. 7 men on horseback, heavily armed, riding hard. They did not look like honest cowboys looking for work. Austin called a halt and positioned the herd in a tight group. The crew took defensive positions, hands near their guns. Hannah felt fear crawl up her spine, but she kept her face calm. She would not show weakness, not in front of her men, not in front of Austin. The riders approached and stopped about 50 yards away. Their leader, a big man with a scarred face and a black beard, rode forward alone. "Well, well," he called out, "looks like a nice little herd you got there." "It is spoken for," Austin called back. "Fort Worth buyers waiting on these cattle. I suggest you move along." "Fort Worth, huh?" The bearded man grinned, showing broken teeth. "That is a long way off. Lot can happen between here and there. Maybe you lose a few head along the way." 50 or 60 head scattered in the night. Who would ever know? "We would know," Austin said flatly. "And we would come looking for them, and for you." The bearded man's smile faded. He studied Austin, then the rest of the crew, clearly assessing his chances. What he saw must not have encouraged him. 6 well-armed cowboys who looked like they knew how to use their weapons, and 1 woman who sat her horse with a rifle across her saddle. The odds were not good for a quick raid. "Just making conversation," the bearded man finally said. No call to get unfriendly. But his eyes promised violence. He was the type who would not forget this encounter. "Conversation is over," Austin said. "Ride on." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then the bearded man wheeled his horse and rode back to his companions. They conferred briefly, then turned and rode east, disappearing over a rise. But Hannah knew they had not seen the last of them. "We will post triple watch tonight," Austin said. "They will try something after dark. That type always does." He looked at Hannah. "You should get some rest while you can. It might be a long night." But Hannah shook her head. "I am staying up. This is my herd. If there is trouble, I am going to be part of dealing with it." Austin looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he nodded. "All right, but you stay in camp with me." No heroics. They pushed the herd another few miles before making camp in a spot Austin selected carefully. A rise with good visibility in all directions, with the cattle bunched between the camp and a line of trees that marked a creek. As darkness fell, the crew prepared for trouble. Guns were cleaned and loaded. Extra ammunition was distributed. Miguel built a small fire that gave off more light than heat, making it hard for anyone to approach unseen. The attack came around midnight. Hannah heard the gunshots first, sharp cracks that split the night. Then she heard the thunder of hooves and the panicked bawling of cattle. Rustlers were trying to stampede the herd, scatter them in the darkness where they could be easily stolen. But Austin had anticipated this. He had positioned the crew in a wide perimeter around the cattle, and at the first sound of trouble they sprang into action. More gunshots rang out, cowboys yelling, the rustlers shouting to each other. Hannah grabbed her rifle and stayed low, her heart hammering. She could see shadowy figures moving in the darkness, could hear the chaos of men and horses and panicked cattle. Austin appeared beside her, his face grim. "Stay here," he ordered, then disappeared back into the night. Hannah wanted to follow him, wanted to help, but she forced herself to wait. She would only get in the way, might cause someone to get hurt trying to protect her. The fight seemed to last forever, but probably only went on for 10 or 15 minutes. Gradually, the gunfire tapered off. The rustlers, realizing they were outmatched, broke off the attack and fled into the darkness. When Austin came back, there was blood on his sleeve, but he waved off her concern. "Just a graze," he said. "Got too close to one of them and he winged me. It is nothing." He looked around at the milling cattle, at the cowboys slowly emerging from their positions. "Charlie, everyone all right?" "All accounted for," Charlie called back. "Tommy took a bullet through his hat, scared him half to death, but he is fine. We hit at least 2 of them, maybe more. They will not be back." The rest of the night was spent calming the herd and making sure no cattle had been lost in the confusion. By dawn, they had accounted for every head. A few were skittish and jumpy, but they would settle down as the day wore on. Hannah insisted on cleaning and bandaging Austin's arm herself. It was indeed just a graze, a shallow furrow along his bicep that had bled more than it should but was not serious. As she worked, her hands shaking slightly from the fading adrenaline, Austin watched her face. "You did good tonight," he said quietly. "Stayed calm, followed orders. Some people panic in a situation like that." "I was terrified," Hannah admitted. "When you disappeared into the fight, when I heard those gunshots, I thought—" She could not finish the sentence. Austin reached up with his good arm and cupped her cheek. "I am fine. We are all fine. And those rustlers learned a valuable lesson about trying to steal from a well-defended herd. What if they come back? What if they bring more men? They will not. Men like that are cowards. They prey on the weak and the unprepared. We showed them we are neither." He smiled. "Your father taught me that. Stand your ground, defend what is yours, and most bullies will back down." The rest of the journey to Fort Worth was uneventful. The cattle drive settled back into the comfortable routine of long days in the saddle, evening camps under the stars, and slow but steady progress north. Hannah found herself growing more confident with each passing day, not just as a rancher, but as a woman in love. Austin had said the words that night after the rustlers' attack, holding her close by the dying campfire. "I love you, Hannah Brennan. I love you and I want to spend my life with you." She had said it back without hesitation. "I love you too." They arrived in Fort Worth on a bright September morning, the cattle tired but healthy, the crew dusty and trail worn but satisfied with a job well done. The stockyards on the north edge of town were a chaotic mass of pens and chutes, with thousands of cattle from dozens of ranches all waiting to be sold. The smell was overwhelming, the noise deafening. Austin handled the negotiations with the buyers her father had contracted with months before. Hannah stood beside him, learning how business was done, watching the way he bargained for fair prices, how he refused to be rushed or intimidated. In the end, they got a good price for the herd, $45 a head for steers, $30 for cows, which came out to just over $12,000 total. Hannah stared at the bank draft in her hands, unable to quite believe it. $12,000. After paying the crew their wages and settling up with Austin for the money he had given her, she would still have almost $8,000 left. Enough to keep the ranch running for years. Enough to hire a permanent crew, make repairs, buy new breeding stock. Enough to secure her future. That evening, after the crew had been paid off and the cattle officially delivered, Austin took Hannah to a proper restaurant in Fort Worth. It was the first meal she had eaten at a real table in nearly a month, the first time she had worn a dress instead of trail clothes. She felt strange and civilized and almost giddy with relief that the drive was over and had been a success. Over steak and potatoes, Austin said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" "About the future. About your ranch, about us." He set down his fork and looked at her seriously. "Hannah, I know we have not known each other very long, less than a month really, but I meant what I said out on the trail. I love you, I want to be with you." Hannah's heart was pounding. "I want that too. So I have a proposal." Not a marriage proposal, not yet, though that is coming soon if I have any say in it. He smiled. But a business proposal. Let me come work for you permanently. Not as foreman for just one drive, but as your partner. I can help you run the ranch, rebuild what your father started. We could do it together. Austin, you gave me $3,200. I still owe you that money. I cannot ask you to invest even more. You are not asking, I am offering. And I am not talking about charity. I am talking about a real partnership. We split the work, we split the profits. We build something together, something that would make your father proud. He reached across the table and took her hand. What do you say? Hannah thought about it for approximately 2 seconds. Yes, she said. Yes, absolutely yes. They left Fort Worth 3 days later, after handling all the business and legal matters that needed attention. The crew dispersed to other jobs, though Austin made sure they all knew there would be work at the Brennan Ranch come spring if they wanted it. Then he and Hannah set out on the long ride back to San Angelo, just the two of them and their horses, and 3 weeks' worth of trail stories to tell. The ride home was the happiest time of Hannah's life. They took their time, stopping to camp by pretty streams, exploring side trails, talking about everything and nothing. They talked about Austin's childhood in Kansas, about Hannah's memories of her mother. They talked about their plans for the ranch, about the breeding program Hannah wanted to start, about Austin's ideas for improving the water system. They talked about the future they would build together. One evening, camped beside the clear fork of the Brazos River, Austin got down on one knee and pulled a ring from his pocket. It was simple, a thin gold band with a small diamond, and he told her he had bought it from a jeweler in Fort Worth. "Hannah Brennan," he said, "will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in San Angelo 2 weeks later, in a small ceremony at the church Hannah's family had attended for years. Miguel gave her away, walking her down the aisle with tears streaming down his weathered face. A few of the ranch hands came into town for the ceremony, and even Whitmore from the bank showed up, looking slightly uncomfortable but offering his congratulations. Charlie acted as Austin's best man, standing proud in his cleanest shirt. After the wedding, Hannah and Austin returned to the ranch and threw themselves into the work of rebuilding. They hired a small permanent crew, fixed the house and barn, mended fences and cleared brush. They bought new breeding stock, carefully selected cattle that would improve the herd. They worked from dawn to dusk, side by side, partners in every sense of the word. Winter came and went. Spring brought new calves and green grass and warm rains that filled the stock tanks. Summer blazed hot and bright, testing them with drought and heat, but they endured. Autumn arrived with cool nights and the promise of another cattle drive to Fort Worth, this one even more successful than the first. Through it all, Hannah and Austin's love grew deeper and stronger. They learned each other's habits and quirks, learned how to work together, how to argue and make up, how to support each other through the hard times. They became a unit, so tightly bonded that folks in San Angelo started referring to them as one entity, the Carsons. A year after the wedding, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. Austin was so excited he could barely speak. He fussed over her like Miguel had never fussed, insisting she rest more, do less heavy work. Hannah mostly ignored him and kept working until her belly got so big she could not climb on a horse anymore. Then, grudgingly, she let him take over most of the outdoor work while she focused on managing the books and dealing with buyers. Their son was born on a cool April morning in 1885, with Miguel pacing outside the bedroom and Austin holding Hannah's hand through the whole ordeal. They named him Jack, after Hannah's father. He had Austin's gray eyes and Hannah's dark hair, and he came into the world hollering loud enough to wake the cattle in the far pasture. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, Emma, with her mother's beauty and her father's calm disposition. And 2 years after that, another son, William, who from birth seemed determined to get into every kind of trouble possible. The ranch prospered. Under Hannah and Austin's joint management, the Brennan-Carson Ranch became one of the most successful cattle operations in West Texas. They built a reputation for quality stock and fair dealing. Cowboys came from all over hoping for work, knowing that the Carsons treated their employees well and paid honest wages. Miguel stayed with them until he passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. With Hannah and Austin and all 3 children gathered around to say goodbye to the man who had been like a grandfather to them all. They buried him on a hilltop overlooking the ranch, with a view of the land he had loved. Charlie became their permanent foreman and worked for them for 30 years before retiring to a small house in San Angelo that Hannah and Austin helped him buy. Tommy grew up to be a fine cowboy and eventually married Hannah's younger cousin, settling on a homestead nearby. Samuel bought his own ranch with money he had saved and became a successful breeder of horses. The Martinez brothers went back to Mexico but visited every few years, always welcome at the Carson table. The years passed in a blur of work and love and family. Hannah and Austin grew older together, their faces weathered by sun and wind, their hands calloused by honest labor. Their children grew up strong and capable, learning the ranching business from the ground up, just as Hannah had learned from her father. Jack, the eldest, became a natural leader, taking over more and more of the day-to-day operations as Austin's joints started to ache with arthritis. Emma married a lawyer from San Angelo and moved into town, but she never lost her love for the ranch and brought her own children out to visit every Sunday. William, the youngest, had his father's wanderlust and spent several years working on ranches all over the West before finally coming home to settle down with a schoolteacher from Fort Worth. Through it all, through births and deaths, successes and setbacks, good years and bad, Hannah and Austin remained devoted to each other. They still took rides together in the evenings when work was done, just the 2 of them on horseback, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. They still stole kisses when they thought no one was looking, making their grown children roll their eyes and laugh. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Austin had a special surprise for Hannah. He took her to the hilltop where Miguel was buried and pointed to a new marker he had placed there. It was a granite stone, simple but elegant, with words carved into it. Here is where our story truly began, the day a cowboy walked into a bank and found his heart. Hannah cried, reading it. I thought our story began when you paid off my loan. No, Austin said, pulling her close. That was just the beginning of the beginning. Our real story is everything that came after. The love we built, the family we raised, the life we made together. That is our story, and it is still being written. They stood there on that hilltop, 2 people who had started as strangers and become soulmates, looking out over the ranch that had brought them together and the future that stretched ahead of them. The Brennan-Carson Ranch sprawled across the valley below, prosperous and productive, a legacy they would pass on to their children and grandchildren. As the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Hannah leaned her head on Austin's shoulder and thought about that desperate day so many years ago when she had been on her knees in a bank, begging for more time. She thought about the cowboy who had lifted her up, who had settled everything with a handshake and a promise. And she thought about how that single moment of kindness had blossomed into a lifetime of love. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For walking into that bank. for saving me, for loving me." Austin kissed the top of her head. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every struggle, every triumph, because it led me to you." They stayed on that hilltop until the stars came out, two figures silhouetted against the darkening sky, holding each other close as they had done for 25 years, and would continue to do for all the years to come. The ranch below was quiet in the gathering dusk. Cattle settled for the night, horses dozing in the corrals, the windows of the ranch house glowing with warm lamplight. It was home. It was family. It was the life they had built from nothing more than desperation and hope, and a cowboy's promise to repay an old debt. And it was perfect. Years later, when Hannah and Austin were both well into their 60s, they would sit on the porch in the evenings and watch their grandchildren play in the yard. There would be 8 of them by then, ranging from toddlers to teenagers, all carrying the legacy of both the Brennan and Carson families in their faces and their fierce independence. Did we do all right? Hannah would ask sometimes, a question that encompassed not just their business success but their entire life together. And Austin would always answer the same way. We did better than all right. We did exactly what we were meant to do. When Austin passed away at the age of 73, peacefully in his sleep after a long and satisfying life, Hannah was beside him as she had been for nearly 50 years. She held his hand and whispered that she loved him, would always love him, and she would see him again someday. She lived another 5 years after that, long enough to see Jack successfully managing the ranch that was now one of the largest in Texas. Long enough to see Emma's children grown and starting families of their own. Long enough to know that the legacy she and Austin had built would endure. On the day before she died, Hannah asked Jack to take her one more time to the hilltop where Miguel was buried, where Austin's stone now stood beside him. She sat there in the warm sunshine, looking out over the land she had fought so hard to keep, the land that had given her everything that mattered. "I kept my promise, Papa," she said to the wind. "I saved the ranch. Austin and we saved it together, and we made it something you would be proud of." She closed her eyes and could almost hear her father's voice, rough and kind. "I am proud of you, Hannah girl, always have been." And she could hear Austin's voice too, warm and loving. "I will always be with you. Every sunrise, every cattle drive, every moment. I am there." Hannah Brennan Carson passed away peacefully that night, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her life full and complete. They buried her beside Austin on that hilltop, with a view of the ranch spreading out below, endless and beautiful under the Texas sky. The stone they placed for her was simple, matching Austin's, with words that told their story. She was saved by a cowboy's love, and together they built a legacy that would last forever. And that legacy did last. The Brennan Carson Ranch continued to prosper for generations, passed down from parent to child, each new generation adding their own chapter to the story. But they never forgot how it all began, with a woman on her knees, a cowboy who lifted her up, and a love that conquered everything. In San Angelo, the story became legend. Old-timers would tell it to youngsters, about the day Austin Carson walked into the First National Bank and paid off Hannah Brennan's debt with his life savings. About how that single act of kindness had led to one of the great love stories of the Texas frontier. About how sometimes, when you are at your lowest point, salvation can walk through the door in dusty trail clothes and a black hat, offering not just money but hope, partnership, and love. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the hilltop where Hannah and Austin rested side by side, locals swore you could still hear it. The sound of laughter and conversation, of two people still talking and planning and dreaming together, their love as endless as the Texas sky above them. The ranch endured, the family flourished, and the love story that had started in desperation and transformed into triumph became a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of partnership, and the enduring magic of two hearts finding each other against all odds in the wild, beautiful, untamed heart of Texas.